When the Overland resumed after COVID, I took it. And I had the honour to travel with Dr. John Wilson, railway historian, author of the Riesling Train and the Overland and other books on trains, great railway historian, and his wife, the novelist. And we all got off in Bordertown because we were worried about the COVID restrictions in Melbourne, getting to Melbourne just to stay overnight. We were on the train just to be on the train, basically, and staying overnight in Melbourne, coming back. And we all got off in Bordertown because we thought if they closed the border, we're stuck in Victoria. Fate worse than death. And John Wilson, welcome to the show once again, John.
Hello, Peter.
The extraordinary thing, I will never forget sitting on that train with you and your wife coming back on the Overland, and you could tell us that entire trip exactly where we were without looking.
Well, I'm not sure whether I was right all the time.
Oh, you think you were? It was uncanny, John. It's a great train, and it's saved, John, isn't it?
Well, yes, but there needs to be a few things done.
Mm-hmm. The funding is announced today, 1.4 million over 4 years from the South Australian government, 11.5 million over 3 years from the Victorian government and 1.4 million over 4 years from the South Australian government, which is good. That's good news, John.
Yes, that's good news.
Because it's still, unlike the Indian Pacific and the GAN, it's still a passenger train. There at numerous stops you can actually get on and off, John. That's my problem with the Indian Pacific. I'd love to go to Kalgoorlie on it or Broken Hill, but you can't. What?
You have to work out how long you're going to live to see whether you get on it or not.
Yeah. But, why can't you get on and off on these trains? It's ridiculous. But the Overland you can. Anyway, what does it need, John?
Well, I think it needs Journey Beyond to present a business plan.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Peter Malinauskas has done the deal with Journey Beyond, and that's good. But there are a number of things that could happen, and we're not talking about big cost items.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not talking about putting sleeping cars on, and we won't get the train going into Adelaide Station. But one of the first things is Wi-Fi and power, USB power for people's computers.
Yes.
Now, these shouldn't be very expensive, and we've been talking about these for a long time.
Mm.
Now, the other problem is that the carriages were built in 1952, and they were built at Islington.
Mm.
And Islington made good carriages, and those carriages have stood the distance, but you've got to wonder how long they're going to be serviceable for.
Mm.
Now, people have been talking about the train from Spain, which is initially they were going to run the train from Spain and between Mount Barker and Adelaide and change the gauge.
Mm.
Now they're talking about running the train from Spain and running it across to Victoria. Now that would be good.
Instead of the Overland?
Well, the Overland's going to wear out sooner or later,
yes.
so that needs to be a business plan.
Mm. How long does it take, Adelaide to Melbourne? 8 hours, is it, John?
No, it's about 10 and a half. It's
10
more
and a
on
half.
Thursday. Now, this is one of the problems. The Australian Rail Track Corporation, which controls the paths, as they call it, every train's got to have a path, a timetable. And when the Overland resumed after the COVID, they set the Thursday path a half an hour earlier. So you had to be at the station, at the terminal at 6:50 in the morning to get the Overland.
Yep.
And it sits at Belair for a half an hour because the path says it's got to cross a freight train or two freight trains.
Ah.
So these are little things that can be done.
Yes.
The other thing that could be done is to have an arrangement with Victoria where you could get to Ararat. Now, the standard gauge line runs through Ararat down through Geelong, and it's a long way around, and this was a legacy of the standard station in 1995. Now, if you could get out at Ararat and get onto a broad gauge velocity train, you'd be in Southern Cross an hour earlier.
Yeah, quite, because it does go via Geelong now, which was part of the deal, wasn't it?
Yes.
That it's a passenger train servicing Geelong, which is fair enough, which is an hour from Melbourne, isn't it? But
Yeah,
it's
now I've got to tell you, about the train from Spain.
mm-hmm.
Tom Coots and Tonus went over to Spain and he came back waxing lyrical about this train that could convert to broad gauge from standard gauge.
Mm-hmm.
But the broad gauge in Spain is 5'6", and the broad gauge in South Australia is 5'3".
Oh.
So you could bring one over. It wouldn't fit.
However, the previous Liberal government, as I understand, John Wilson, railway historian, wasn't agreeing to fund the Overland, but this was a Malinauskas government commitment, and they've backed it, which is good, isn't it, John?
That's good. Now,
because it was in doubt, the Overland. When was it? We used to call it the Melbourne Express when it was a night train. When was it the Melbourne Express, John?
well, it was the Melbourne it depends which way it went. If it was going the other way, it was the Adelaide Express.
Sure, yeah.
It was from 1900 to 1935, because originally it was the Intercolonial Express.
Good heavens.
So when we had a Commonwealth, we had to call it we had to give it a new name, so it was the Melbourne Express. And in 1926, Harold Clapp, who was the Commissioner of Railways in Victoria, coined the term the Overland, but it took 9 years for the South Australians to agree.
Well, we always call it, when I wrote it, decades ago, it was still, we called it the Melbourne Express. It went on, that name, the Overland always seemed, new to me.
Yes.
Well, John, it's good news, isn't it, John?
Yes, it's good news, but I'd like to see a bit of a commitment from Journey Beyond to do a business plan. And the other thing I think needs to be looked at is running it 3 times a week. It's presently 2 services a week.
Yes.
Now, when we had the end of the COVID, Mark Radford, who was then the Mayor of rural city of Horsham, set up the Friends of the Overland. It's a Facebook page. Anybody can join, and it's now up to about 600 members.
Oh,
now,
wow.
The Overland has become a bit of a cult.
Yes.
Thing, and it's attracting more people. And I think part of that is the efforts of the Friends of the Overland.
Good.
And
do they have a website, John, the Friends of the Overland?
No, it's a Facebook page.
Oh, yes. Oh, good. Well, John, thank you. Sorry, go on.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, John. John Wilson, railway historian. I have great respect for John. His books are excellent. His book on the Overland, a Social History, beautiful book. And his book on the Clare Railways, and a book on Bob the Railway Dog, I think. And his wife has a novel which touches on trains too.